Kwekwe Nandobak Undela Wazi, Vera Longtoshian. Hello, friends. My name is Vera Longtoshian, and I'm the director of the Vermont Abenaki Artist Association. I'd like to welcome you and thank you for attending the second discussion in our Two-Eyed Seeing speaker series. This speaker series was organized by Vermont Abenaki Artist Association and the Abenaki Arts and Education Center, and we're so excited to be partnering with the Abenaki Trails Project and Monadnock Archaeology Consulting. The program is supported by Vermont Humanities and Arts Council, and we are so grateful for their support of our work. And in this speaker series, any views, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this do not necessarily represent those of our supporters. So that's a little bit of the housekeeping to get us started. And we're going to drop some links down into the chat box, just in case people can't stay until the very end. There's a program survey there, and all of our programs are free. However, if you'd like to make a donation, you certainly can. There'll be a link for that. So that's some of the housekeeping we have to get out of the way before we start this amazing discussion. And the series is called Two-Eyed Seeing, and that term was coined by a Mi'kmaq Nation elder named Albert Marshall. And the term describes an experience of seeing the strength of Indigenous knowledge with one eye and the strength of Western knowledge with the other eye. And so today our speakers will share their perspectives on community relationships with various cultural and historical sites. Some might call them archaeology sites as well. So we're going to be bringing archaeological perspectives together with Indigenous perspectives. And we are joined by New Hampshire Representative Sherry Gould of the Nulhegan Abenaki tribe, who is a member of the New Hampshire House of Representatives, and Dr. Robert Goodby of Monadnock Archaeology Consulting, and they are longtime friends and collaborators. As charter members of the New Hampshire Commission on Native American Affairs, Sherry serves as chair, and Bob was the representative appointed by the New Hampshire Division of Historic Resources. And their work together includes educational projects funded by New Hampshire's Charitable Foundation, which we may talk about in a little while, and the Abenaki Trails Project that seeks to honor and share a more inclusive history of the Abenaki people and to highlight historical Abenaki sites. In tonight's program, we welcome both Sherry and Bob for a discussion about a deep presence and a more inclusive history through Two-Eyed Seeing. So thank you and welcome, both of you. We're excited to have you here. Okay, so Sherry and Bob, thank you so much for being here, and you can feel free to unmic yourselves through the program whenever you're like. We're hoping to have kind of a homey atmosphere, so it seems like we're all sitting in the same room together. And then we'll get started. So I see Bob. Now let's get Sherry up there.
And while you're doing that, I'll say a quick apology. We have two issues going on here. My email is going crazy tonight. Some national database would really like Representative Gould to vote a certain way, and I can't silence the dings. And the other issue is that we had baby lambs this morning, twin boys, Amos and Andy, and Amos is not very bright. So he's in the barn crying. We can hear it on the baby monitor, and the dog is barking. Bill's gone out, so I'll be on mute as much as I can, but when I'm on off mute, if you hear weird noises, that would be it.
Thank you so much for sharing. So we're going to start this evening pretty much with introductions. I really didn't want to introduce you because I think you can introduce yourselves so much better than I can. So maybe each of you can start by taking turns telling us who you are, maybe professionally, maybe within the community, and how you fit into the big picture of what we're talking about tonight.
Okay. All yours, Sherry.
Okay. Kwai and Delaware Sally Gould and Dai Monadnock and Wikiak Massasecum no Ziabas no Dakaat. And I just said in Abenaki, hi, my name is Sherry. You'll probably recognize that from when Vera said it. And I was born in Peterborough. So I always say Monadnock, although I just learned that Monadnock is not technically in Peterborough. And I live near Lake Massasauga. So I live in a little section of Warner, halfway between Bradford and Henniker. And I'm a professional basket maker. I was elected last fall to the House of Representatives. That's new and different and keeping me very busy, but it's been an exciting opportunity speaking about two eyes and two worlds, of educating some of the legislators about some Abenaki issues when they come up. So that's been a fun opportunity. And yeah, and we started Abenaki Trails Project a couple of years ago, and a group of us who live in New Hampshire, have always lived here, have started exploring local sites. And that's a little bit about what Bob and I will talk about. And I love working with Dr. Goodby. He is an incredible collaborator, but just to be clear, he works with many other Abenaki. His cultural knowledge did not all come from me. And we don't socialize together, though we'd probably have fun if we did, but we live far apart and we don't. And so anyway, thank you for having us.
Okay. All right. I actually have just a couple of pictures to go along with my introduction. So you don't have to look at me. I'm gonna see how my screen sharing works. Okay. There we go. And from the beginning. Okay, does that look okay to everybody? Okay, so yeah, we know why we're here. So yeah, my name is Bob Goodby, and I am a native New Englander, although I am not a native person. I grew up in Connecticut and have spent most of the rest of my life since graduating from high school up here in New Hampshire. And I just sort of by serendipity fell in love with archaeology when I was an undergraduate at UNH, and that happened when I was working on a Native American site in the New Hampshire Lakes region. And I have never looked back. That has been my life's work since that afternoon in the summer of 1984. And I have worked on sites all over New England, but mostly in New Hampshire. I went to graduate school at Brown University, where I did my doctoral dissertation trying to explain the styles of the very elaborately decorated ceramic pots that were being made by Native women in the 17th century, and to see if those decorations had any correspondence to their tribal identity, or if other sorts of things were going on. And so yeah, this has been my life's work, and that is a much younger picture of me. I'm going on 40 years in this business, and that one was from my second year in archaeology. I have also for about 30 years or so been a college professor, including stints at Wheaton College in Massachusetts and the University of New Hampshire. And for the past 23 years, I've been on the faculty of Franklin Pierce University, where I've had the great privilege of doing a lot of archaeological research with my students in the Monadnock region, which was not a part of the world that archaeologists had known much about. So that's one of my major roles. And I have also, as an archaeologist, been working for decades also as what's called a consulting archaeologist. I'm one of these people who gets hired when the federal government requires that an archaeological study be done before a particular kind of development occurs. And I do this all over New Hampshire and in some of the other New England states. Most of my projects are pretty boring, but every once in a while we find some really interesting things. My probably the site of my lifetime is the one we worked on in 2010, is a Paleo-Indian site in Keene, discovered before the construction of a new middle school that had, among other things, a radiocarbon date of 12,600 years ago, which basically gives us, archaeologists anyway, a beginning point for native occupation. There's no older dated site anywhere in New England. I work on all sorts of sites. Historic sites, and the picture on the bottom is actually an excavation in the basement of an African American church in Portland, Maine. So my archaeology has taken me a lot of places, but it's Native American history that is very much been my focus. I am also a speaker for New Hampshire Humanities, and this is something I've been doing for about 15 years or so, and this has been a great pleasure for me. It allows me to take the things that I learn as an archaeologist and bring them to ordinary people in community settings, and it's given me a chance to really talk about my work in a different sort of way, not as a scientist or someone writing technical reports that will only be read for a handful of people, but somebody who communicates with a wide audience. And I found I actually enjoy that more. And so I've been doing a lot of that, given talks all over the state of New Hampshire. Some of you I know have seen them. Some of you, looking at the list of audience members here, some of you have hosted me in these talks. But I do one sort of broad overview looking at Native American history in New Hampshire, and then I do a second talk that's all about that site in Keene, going back more than 12,000 years. And that experience has been a big one for me. And my role as an archaeologist in telling a story and in working with Native people and telling that story is something that I've been spending more and more time with. A couple of years ago, I published a book, and I took my experience as a speaker for New Hampshire Humanities and tried to do with the book the same thing I do when I'm speaking to a public audience, which is make the fascinating archaeology and history of this area accessible to a broad range of people. So with some support from some great local nonprofits, a book came out in 2021 and has been well received. And so that's another hat that I wear. So I'm a professor, a consultant, an archaeologist, and an author. And this is my final slide here. Working with Native people, this is something that when I first got into archaeology, we didn't think we had to do. Really was not a thing back in the 1980s, wasn't happening. And here in New England, we could sort of conveniently pretend that really weren't any Native communities here to work with. But that, of course, was wrong. And I have been doing things with Native people since I was working on my dissertation research. And I remember the first time I did this, I went to Plymouth Plantation to speak with Nenepashemet, the man who ran the Wampanoag Indian program there. And I went there to ask him about the designs on these pots I was studying. And looking back on it, when I was thinking about tonight, I realized that I went back there, I mean, with a good heart, but I was there to ask, and I was there to take. And since that experience, my work with Native people has become a little more reciprocal. So I've been involved in all kinds of things. I have worked with repatriation projects, returning Native American remains under NAGPRA. I've done teachers workshops, and I've done a number of things with Sherry. We had a great time at St. A's College a little while back, and we keep running into each other all over the place. And so I've done a number of things with Native people, and it's more and more part of the work I do. So that's me. Yep. And so I'll stop my share here. Okay.
Thank you so much for that, Bob. I was just looking at that last slide, and I saw a painting by Francine Poitras Jones. The painting is called Water is Life. I just want to call out to that because she's in the audience, and so everybody knows who painted that. That is actually the key image for a Nibizone Water is Life exhibit that's been traveling since 2017. So that's very cool, and it was very cool that you used that when you did that program with St. A's. So I was listening to while you were talking, and you brought up somebody very important in the Native community of the Northeast, Nani, we know him as Nani Nenepashemet, and your early work with him, and that it's amazing that you're able to call out that you understood and understand today that it was kind of like an extractive way of like coming to people and taking, and now you're learning how to work more reciprocally. So I like that as a really amazing takeaway, that we don't always do things in the most perfect way, but we're all learning, and it's always evolving and changing. So thank you for that amazing introduction. And if we come back to Sherry, um, I'd love to hear more about the Abenaki Trails Project. What are some of the programs you've been involved with? How's that project been received by the community?
Okay, thanks. Well, it was, boy, almost 3 years ago now that Daryl Peasley wanted to help people understand in New Hampshire. That kind of gets back to what Bob was saying originally, you know, when we worked to get the bill for the Commission on Native Affairs passed in 2010, there actually were a lot of legislators who thought no Abenaki ever lived here, or if they acknowledged we were ever here, we were a pass-through state. And certainly people didn't know we were still here. So that was Daryl's goal. And to get some information on Indian chimney, which I can't talk about the collaborative work with that because Bob went with Daryl out to, to look at Indian chimney. But at any rate, that the project quickly spread. What we soon learned is that our people never lived in a town, in a box on a map. And so in order to look at the sites, we broadened it to 4 towns to start with, and we keep adding towns. And so again, because our villages, the way we went along the rivers, it just keeps building on itself. And so because it's all connected across the land. But the area we cover is primarily from Hopkinton, kind of in a V shape, along the Warner River to Sunapee, and then along the Kentucky River to the Monadnock region. And we're fanning our way back and forth and getting closer to our destinations. We've hit Sunapee. Now we need to do some more sweeping on the southern part along the Kentucky. And so it's just been an incredible experience that the community has really loved and embraced. People love hearing the stories. It's just really interesting because Daryl and I grew up here and people knew we were Native, we would always hear the stories because people would say, what about this? Or what about that? What is Indian tie-up? What is it true it was this or it was that? So I always had assumed everybody knew it. But as we started working on this project, it became clear, no, some people didn't know anything about any of these stories. You might have a couple of people that would know this one or that one. And of course, I never had the answers to what they meant. So that's been a lot of what we've done, is dig into what the myths are that have, or the stories, are they myths or are they true fact, and bring that history up to date and really search it out. And so it takes a lot of digging, a lot of scraping. I call it scraping the colonial veneer off the truth of what's there, looking to see in our language or in sister sites, like we have a medicine spring here. Well, the Brunswick Springs in Vermont, there's a lot of cultural knowledge about that that could come to bear on what few historical facts we had about the medicine waters here in Bradford and the Abenaki presence there historically. So yeah, it's just been a lot of fun, a lot of collaboration with our community partners. We couldn't do it without all our community partners, and really a much more clear understanding that that's how our people have survived through all these generations since contact, is through a lot of community collaboration. And as Bob shared and you magnified, it's a give and a take, not just a take, not just a, hey, tell me what this means as if I've got that in my back pocket. It's like, well, why don't you look through the Historical Society diaries and see what you can find that the settlers in 1824 were recording and tell me. And I could do my own digging into the language or the other cultural sites. And yeah, so I think that's what I can say about that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. And I think there's also a combination from what things I've heard you talk about. There is also a component of sometimes like oral histories from the town, and Abenaki families are also fitting into that puzzle, right?
Yeah, for sure. The gypsy stories, especially because that's a part of my family history, and then finding out what other settlers or colonial families knew about them and their interactions with them, along with my own family history about it. So, yeah.
And just to clarify, when people hear the word gypsy, we know what was meant at that historic time. Can you please explain for folks that haven't heard this reference for Abenaki families, what it is, what it's not? Thank you.
Thanks. So, in my own family, the Dyers and the Blakes, and this was also a really prominent place in the Phillips family. They were known as gypsies. I think probably based on a few reasons. One is because there was this myth, the Abenaki were gone, the Indians were gone, we've chased all the Indians away. So people didn't want to talk about that. And for our ancestors, having people call us gypsies was just like, okay, whatever, we know who we are and what we are. And so it was written up in the eugenics records that we were gypsy families, but it was also something people identified with. I mean, I remember Tom Phillips telling me on his birth certificate, it said his race was gypsy. But our people did travel. They traveled by horse and wagon, and they would go from farm to farm. They would go in the woods, get their ash, make baskets, sell them to the farm families, and also braid corn mats, corn husk mats, and then go to the Tunbridge Fair. That was really big for my family, was going to and trading horses. And yeah, so that's where that term came from. And but you'll read in the papers, you'll read in the diaries about the gypsies coming to town. But when you see the heavy references to basket making, and I've read some scholarly works about the gypsy families in New Hampshire, that they were not, how did they word it? They worded it kind of in a comical way, that they were not basket and trinket maker sellers. So that seems to be a kind of clear distinction between who was Abenaki and who was not.
Thank you for that clarification. So I'm loving the way this is all coming together. And so we're bringing this archaeological perspective together with Native American perspectives, and as you're looking at different historical and cultural sites. So how did the two of you start working together?
That's a funny story, actually. Do you want to tell it, Sherry, or?
Let's hear your perspective. I always
Okay. Quite a few years ago, before I had moved to PowerPoint, I was doing a talk for New Hampshire Humanities, and I forget the town, somewhere around Sherry, I think. And
No, it was over on the coast. Was it wasn't Newcastle, but a town out just outside of Newcastle.
Okay. And I showed up, and one of the deals is the host is supposed to provide the slide projector. And I showed up with my carousel, and there was no slide projector. So we had a crisis, but they managed to get an old-fashioned one where you put in one slide at a time. And this very nice lady showed up and offered to do that for me as I was doing the talk. And we've been buddies ever since. So that's where it started. Oh. And yeah, we keep running into each other. We were there. We were both in the room. I remember when we were meeting with the governor to try to get the New Hampshire Native American Affairs Commission started, and we were both charter members, worked closely then, and we've done educational projects together and all sorts of things. So it's been a pleasure.
I'll never forget when we were testifying. We were both in the room testifying for the commission bill. The governor declined our request to do a proclamation because he really felt it was important for that to go through the legislative process. And Bob and I are there, and we both give our testimony, and we're just kind of not pretentious people, right? And then the senators announced that they really would like to hear from the experts. And we just kind of looked at each other like, okay. So then the bill gets passed and people get appointed. And who was the archaeologist appointed? It was Bob. And who was the genealogist appointed? It was me. So I did get an apology from one of the senators afterwards. Well, I guess we made a mistake. You were the experts.
I love it. Okay, so having the experts in the room working together, you've been working, how long has it been that you've been working together?
Oh, 15 years at least, I'd say. Yeah.
At least, yeah. Because Nelson and I used to go to the Humanities talks together, and that was a long time ago, maybe even 20. Well, 20 that we've known each other and worked more closely over. Yeah. 15.
What kind of projects have you worked together with over the last few years?
So Bob invited me in 2010 to go over to the Keene site, and he's heard me say this before. So growing up, it was my brother that was always interested in the artifacts and the stone stuff. And to me, it was always a box of rocks. It was just like, and so Bob invited me to go to this dig, and I was like, that's so sweet of him, but I never did go. And then it turned out to be such a big important dig. It was like, why didn't I ever go? So we didn't work as closely together on that as he would have had me be if I would smartened up. But at any rate, and then for Abenaki Trails, Bob's worked with us on several projects. We had him comment and speak to us on the footprints in the rock. And I think that's kind of a good one where we can give that two-eyed view. And then on Indian tie-up, we'd like to do a dig. I haven't gotten it together to get the landowner's permission. I sort of did, but then it got sidelined. Anyway, that may be coming in the future. And then on the weir in Hillsborough is another project that we just last summer explored, and we need to do some work on a landowner permission to do a dig at that site as well. So the Indian tie-up, but Dr. Goodby hasn't been there yet, but we've talked about it, and he's agreed he would love to do it. So yeah.
And it would also be really helpful when you mention sites, you know, the Indian tie-up, but for members of the audience, they're not going to know maybe what state we're even talking about. So maybe if we could give it a town or something like that when we talk about sites. Thank you.
Sure. Indian tie-up is in Henniker, New Hampshire. And the myth was that it was where the Abenaki wintered, way up in these granite ledges after summering on Lake Massasecum. And I knew that was crazy. Like, it would be way too cold. And it's this big cavernous, wide open space. Yeah, I knew that wasn't true. And then people said, well, maybe they tied their ponies up. Like I said, no, we didn't have ponies then. Later, my gypsy ancestors were trading horses, but that wasn't that wasn't in the 1600s. But anyway, through a lot of study and a lot of digging, it finally hit me that in the captive stories I had read, that they would go just beyond civilization and have a rendezvous spot, because different warriors would have gone to different towns and then brought their captives and booty back and met up and then divided up to go on to Canada. And so this was the perfect location for that. Henniker and Hopkinton and Hillsborough was the line of settlement. It was right above that. And it just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper with the story that it was a Quaker captive story that had really given that kind of detail that clued me in that this could well be that kind of a site. And indeed, Quakers were really prominent in the settlement of Henniker, and Henniker had never had any depredations, as they call it, the colonial view. But in the history of Henniker, it was very clear that the early settlers had always told that they would put up the warriors and give them provisions. So the Quakers were kind of aiding and abetting the Abenaki warriors in that sense. So I think they felt very safe to stop just a few miles north of town, of the settlement, with the captives. So that's what our dig would be to look for, is buttons, colonial shoe buckles, colonists were not hiking 1,500 feet up into granite ledges back in that time. So if we find those kinds of things there, it could be an indication of it being that the type of site we think it is. And there's a lot more to that story I won't go into, but so Indian tie-up is in Henniker. I did mention Hillsborough for the weirs, and the footprints are also in Henniker.
So I've had a lot of fun working with the Abenaki Trails Project, and with some of the work I do that's required by federal law, sometimes there's consultation with Native groups with that work, but it's always done by the federal agency. I don't get involved in it or have any real contact. And I've got to say it's done on a very haphazard basis. But this is very different because I sort of feel like I'm not only involved in this project, but I'm the archaeologist on call. So if they need perspective from a pretty conventional archaeologist, I can come and give it. And that becomes one more piece of the puzzle to look at and think about. And so with the Indian footprints in Henniker, that's a remarkable site, big boulder with what looks for all the world like human footprints going across the top of it, but in the stone. And it got me thinking. Sherry and I have different perspectives on that. But I think we both agree that it very likely was a significant place for Native people, regardless of whether those footprints are just natural phenomena or something else. It really sort of forced me to think about things in a different way. And so that's getting me 20 years down the road to a more reciprocal relationship, and it made me a better archaeologist, I think.
And also Sherry gave me a set of photographs. So if you ever want me to bring a picture up, Sherry, tell me which one you're looking for. Okay.
Oh, bring it. You can bring up one of the footprint pictures. In fact, I think there's one with my foot sliding into the footprint. And I'll just share that I think, Bob, what you said at the time was, unless there are significant stories that the Abenaki have, your inclination was that this could well be a natural phenomenon. And then we did a little more research and digging and found indeed that, so that hides the footprint in the rock, but my foot was a perfect fit. And in fact, both of my feet are in the footprints, and it's even a comfortable stance. But I know you have another one that just shows the footprints.
Coming up.
So I thought that was really a beautiful way for us to, and what we found for the historical information is that these footprints are documented in several places around New England and beyond, and that the stories that go with it is always that a very powerful medicine person, or that it was somebody special that where it's able to, some people say shaman, that words come to be whatever, a person with strong personal medicine, they could sink their feet in the rock. So of course we have Passaconaway, who had that reputation, and all the stories of him talk about being able to do those kinds of things. So Daryl was quite disappointed when my foot fit in there so perfectly, because he really wanted it to be big Passaconaway's footprints. How do we know? Maybe Passaconaway had small feet, right?
Okay, so that's one site. Can you tell me about another site? So you mentioned 3 sites. You talked a little bit about footprints. With the tie-up site, Sherry, you talked about being out there. Bob, have you been out there with Sherry? What's your perspective?
Nope.
Not yet. That's a future project.
Yep.
I think
Okay,
the weir site will be fun to talk about, because Bob has so much experience with the weir on the Ashwellet River, and that really ties in with what our hopes are that we'll find on the spot on the Kentucky. So I'll start very quickly by saying 2 summers ago, it was actually my brother. I told you he loves rocks. We were doing a presentation and we said, anybody who knows local stories in Hillsborough about Native sites? And my brother raised his hand and said, there's a weir in the river. And he goes, I'm pretty sure it's a weir. So I got a hold of Bob. We got a hold of the state archaeologist. So then the state archaeologist needed the coordinates. So I went to Google Maps to get the coordinates, and that's all it took. Looking down from Google Maps, I'm like, oh my God, there it is. Yeah. So I reached out to Bob, and then he can take it from there because he was able to find a lot more information. Exactly. This picture was actually taken by a drone that Bob Lepre, he's a former photographer for the Union Leader, and he lives in Hopkinton. So he's another incredible community collaborator who does videos and pictures for us. So he brought his drone down, and this shot is with the drone. And then there's another shot of the site with a bunch of us there that shows Dr. Goodby checking his notes. So that's what he can talk about.
Now, this was very exciting because one of my first projects when I started teaching at Franklin Pierce was the fish dam in Swansea. And it's a V-shaped dam made up of boulders in the river with the point of the V pointing downstream, and it was used to trap migratory fish as they're coming up the river in the spring. And we were able to show by digging on the bank next to it that the dam was likely built about 4,000 years ago and continued in use all the way into the 18th century when the Europeans came. And as I was looking at this, I was finding more and more examples of these, but in Maryland or New Jersey or something of that sort, there weren't too many coming up in New England, but they have started to. And then when Sherry told me about this one, we went and looked at it, and yeah, there it is. It's smaller than the one in Swansea, but it's a V-shaped alignment. The point of the V is pointing downstream. And the other thing we're able to do, because we're working on getting landowner permission to maybe do some testing there, but I went into the archaeological site files that the state of New Hampshire maintains, and it turns out that a few years earlier, a company had been hired to do some archaeological survey on the power line that runs right by this, and right as they got up to where the dam was, they found a site. So I think that's another one. And I actually think the more we're aware of these, the more we learn about them, the more of them we're going to see. And when you combine these different perspectives and you're looking for things you didn't look for before, it changes your understanding of the area. So I'm really looking forward to doing some more work at that site.
You just reminded me, a tribal member who lives here over in Warner said that his family knows about one up near the Blackwater area, Salisbury area. So he's going to take me to see that. So we may have two to do, Bob.
Excellent. Yep.
That's really cool. So it's exciting to hear about the different types of work together. I'm so sure you were also imagining these kind of, like, what I'm hearing is that these partnerships are sort of deepening because now you're bringing other people in that are doing the drone photos and stuff. So what is your hope that's going to come out of these partnerships?
I think just a deeper understanding of the history, a more complete story, because, and you were asking about the two-eyed seeing. So I wanted to share the story that our tribal historian, Brian Shenevert, had collected all kinds of accounts of the Abenaki in they're primarily the raids, right? The raids the Abenaki did on the towns. And so in the colonial records, it's always General so-and-so with an Abenaki chief and a few in the however many Indians. And it's usually like a colonial military person with maybe 25 soldiers, an Indian, and 50 to 100 warriors, right? So clearly the bulk of it is Native American, and yet the credit always goes to the colonial. They're named first. So Brian was going to publish that, and I said, let me go through it and reverse everything. So I went through the whole thing, and every single one I said, Chief so-and-so with 50 warriors, aided by so-and-so with a few colonials. And it was amazing how powerful. Like at first I just sort of laughed and thought, well, this will be interesting. It'll be kind of fun. No, it was so powerful. Like you read it by reversing the story, and it just, the whole thing is so different. And for us, it's so frustrating that we're always seen as pawns, right, of the English and the French, but we were not pawns. We were thinking about who we needed to partner with to make the best advantage for the tribe and for the people, and making our own decisions and working as at least equal collaborators, and sometimes in the leadership role, but that's not the story people hear. So at any rate, if I was making another point, I've forgotten.
And what about you, Bob? What are you seeing as the advantages of this two-eyed seeing in the partnership with the Abenaki community?
Well, it's helped me see things in a different way, and to sort of follow off what Sherry was saying, that same sort of thing about reversing the lens. The area down in Swansea where the fish dam is has actually got an incredible archaeological history. There are 11,000 years worth of sites there, and it's also the location where during the French and Indian Wars, the Abenaki built a fort, and it was so substantial that you could see the outlines of the wooden of the berms surrounding it almost up to 1900. And that struck me as a very romantic story, that, you know, this place they had been for 12,000 years was the place they were going to build a fort as they're, you know, being invaded, and they're hanging on to their land. And I made a romantic story of it. And I remember a number of years ago, I was talking with Marge Bruchak, who's quite a Abenaki historian and cultural figure and scholar. And I'm waxing on about this story, and she cocked her eyebrow at me and was looking skeptical. And I said, "What?" and she said, "Bob, they were players. You know, they were active agents in this. They were not passive victims, or pawns. Okay? They had their own agenda, their own ambitions, their own complexities, and that made me think about things in a different way. I think it made me think about things in a better way. So there are a lot of examples like that. So
Absolutely. And for Abenakis, diplomacy was very important. Before European people ever arrived, and even to this day, diplomacy is really important. And when you look back historically, Abenaki people were multilingual. They spoke French, they spoke English, they spoke Abenaki, they spoke Latin, many as well. So Abenakis aren't just primitive people running around in the woods as pawns. So thank you for uplifting that. That's really important. And as we're kind of coming down to our last few minutes, are there any other organizations or community groups that you think are important in two-eyed seeing and interpretation of Abenaki history and culture that we should mention while we're here together?
I can name a few. I think we need to thank the Hopkinton Historical Society and the Warner Historical Society, and specifically Nancy Joshua and Lynn Clark, who have worked at the New Hampshire Historical Society, the Kearsarge Indian Museum, and now they're at Hopkinton Historical and Warner Historical, respectively. Hopkinton is our fiscal agent, and they both are incredibly supportive, and the knowledge and the understanding, because they've also done the work, as Bob has talked about, and they're both trained archaeologists as well. So I think they're just incredible partners. And the Kearsarge Indian Museum, where I at one time served as a trustee, and but I've always lived here in town, and they've been here, and so they're just an incredible asset. And I know Bob served as a trustee as well, and has his own experience with them.
Mm-hmm. Another group that comes to mind is sort of a project, the Atawi project that Rich Holshoe manages. That's linked with the Elnu community, and same sort of thing. Bringing different perspectives together, bringing people together to talk, to listen, and that I've worked with them and done events with them, and that has been very productive. But I think these organizations are key, but I think equally, for me anyway, it's the personal relationships that people establish. When you meet people, you realize that you may have different perspectives, different histories, but you come with a good heart and a common interest and an understanding that this history is important, and that this history is ongoing. And the bringing together of the different perspectives, the talking with each other, I think can only be to the good. And I'm very heartened that it's going on as much as it is.
Yeah, and I think Bob brings up a good point that it's for us as Abenaki people, all of the, I mentioned Nancy Joe and Lynn, but there's many other key leaders that are working with Abenaki people, and they work with multiple Abenaki people. Bob has mentioned many other Abenakis that he works with as well. And so I think, sometimes you hear talk about like as if there's enclaves of who's important and who's not. I mean, from Abenaki Trails, we also have developed a whole research project at the Bradford Cedar Bog. Bill's worked on that with UNH. And we have one of our tribal students there earning her master's degree to be able to do that research. They got a grant to study the Cedar Bog beside the Medicine Springs in Bradford. So I think it's important to understand that there are key leaders in the one-eye side of the equation that are getting to know many, many Abenaki from the other eye side, and that together, that it's like all of us working together as Rich brings valuable information to the equation, and as we bring information to the equation, as Paul Bunnell shares information. There's many Abenaki leaders on both sides of the river that are working to really bring the understanding and the breadth to really get that complete history.
Sure. And on the Indigenous side, yes, Abenaki Trails Project. There's also AHA, Abenakis Helping Abenakis. When you go up to Missisquoi, there is the Circle of Courage up there. At Elnu, you mentioned Atui. At Kawasuk, they have the White Pines Association. Intertribally, we have the Abenaki Artist Association, the Arts and Education Center as well. And I also want to throw out a couple thank yous as well, because I see Lynn Clark is in the audience. And Lynn was very influential for me in shaping who I was as a curator and stuff like that. And it was actually when she and Nancy Joe were at Mount Kearsarge, I got to like fully curate my first museum exhibit. So that's an opportunity. Museums and other cultural institutions from the dominant culture have this opportunity to be able to give opportunities. And that's a gift, to be able to mentor people from Indigenous communities and to ask them, what can I do for you? Not just what can I get, but what can I do for you?
And the other piece is in New Hampshire, another important group is at UNH, there's the Native American Collaborative Coalition, I think it's called, INHCC. And that has been a really vibrant group that's been doing a lot of work in educating groups, and the Kawasuk Band of Pennacook people work actively with them. And they started the Native American Minor at UNH. Dartmouth is another resource that has some resources. Yeah, it is.
Mhm. And let's see. So one of our questions is, what can the audience, regular people, do to support the Abenaki, to advocate for the Abenaki, and to be good allies?
Over to you, Sherry.
I think that what Bob and Vera have both alluded to, people will call me up and they're like, I really want to know the history of my land. And I understand that yearning and that want. I don't have that. I don't have like a book with the history of every piece of property in the state that I can, and the amount of time it would take to research that. So, getting a question like, what are some sources you could suggest that I could do some research to learn the history? And then, we can give out ideas on resources. And one of the great ones would be the Abenaki Arts and Education's website, where Vera has a lot of great material. But at any rate, so I think that just understanding that though there's more of us than people think, we're still kind of small in number in terms of the people who are active and put themselves out there. And so no matter who you're going to ask, that you're asking for a chunk of people's time, and we don't have a lot of time. So making sure that you're not being extractive when you're excited and looking for information. With Abenaki Trails, we're just so blessed. I mean, we have people, they're coming down, they're picking apples with us, they're helping us boil syrup and make cider. And, so it's very give and take. Kearsarge Food Hub, oh my God, I have to mention them in the Abenaki Seeds Project. So it's that reciprocal piece, I think, that really makes all the difference. And the same thing with land statements. I'll get, I want to do a land acknowledgement statement. Can you help me write it? And what really has started to take hold is people understanding, and Lynn Clark was really great in terms of, this needs to not be a checkbox for political correctness. It needs to be much more than that. And so what is the ongoing relationship you're going to form with Abenaki people moving ahead, with the conservation land trusts and so many people? They really are reaching out and getting involved with Abenaki people. And in terms of access to trees for Bill does birch bark, my husband does birch bark canoes, and for the ash, as much ash as we can save before the bug kills it all. And then sweetgrass and medicine plants and all those kinds of things. Liz Shalaboy with her biting the bark. That's so incredible what she does. But that we all have access to the natural resources, that like we don't have to, nobody has to give us back the land, but you can, when you're conserving land and resources, you can share with the remnant of us the materials we need to continue the culture.
Perfect. And in the chat box, we have a few people asking about how to volunteer for the various Abenaki organizations. If you just send your email in and what you're interested in doing, or which organization you think you might be able to work with, drop it in the chat box and we can share it with those organizations. And for our last question of the night, and I'd love to hear from both of you on this, from both perspectives. Who gets to decide what is culturally authentic, and what does that process look like?
Well, thanks. Probably not me. Okay. Cultural authenticity is a tough one. The thing I can do as an archaeologist is give people, especially non-native people, an understanding of how long this history is, how complicated it is, that there is not just one native past, but an evolving story, and sort of spark their curiosity. But that story, as it continues into the historic period and into the modern period, involves Abenaki people surviving by hiding. It involves a lot of loss of culture, and a lot of people from outside who I think would want to challenge and say, well, this is not real, because you didn't learn this from your parents. You're trying to reconstruct this. And one of the things that I have learned about the Abenaki history here is that the Abenaki have always lived in a very large world, and they have always drawn things from other societies around them, and they have given things to other societies around them. And that question of authenticity sort of says that there's one essential Abenaki essence, and if you haven't got that, you're not real, and it becomes used as a weapon against people, and that's not something I have any interest in. So
Thanks, Bob. I would concur. And to me, the diversity that, in the legislature, it's been shocking to people to not, we just started the conversation about recognition, and I had to educate them, like, you don't get to recognize the Abenaki. It's not like you can herd all the Abenaki in the Great Hall and get a sword out and dub us as recognized. We're individual tribes and bands. We each have our own history. For me personally, the answer to the question of who decides cultural appropriateness, I can only speak to what my family's culture is, and I've shared some of that, the gypsy stories and the things that my parents practiced that I know came out of that. My grandmother's use of plants for medicine and the gardening practices and suckering with the fish and all of those things. And so I can speak to the cultural experience of my family. And we have different leaders who do different things, but I can't speak to what is culturally appropriate for another band could be very different than what's culturally appropriate. So anyway, that's what I can say about it is, I think it's a big question. It's a broad question, and that I think it's a question that's still evolving. Don't you, Vera?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And I really agree with what both Bob and Sherry are saying. It's something that's evolving. There is no one strictly right way. Anyone that says this is the Abenaki way and it's the only Abenaki way, I don't know about that, because we have always had family bands, and each family band kind of has their own way of being. Yes, we have a lot of cultural similarities and things like that. We did a lot of cultural sharing. We continue to share between our family bands and our tribes and so forth. But I have never known there to be just one way of doing things in my lifetime. And the idea of the word gypsy came up again in the chat. And once again, when we're seeing the word gypsy, about what the dominant culture was calling Abenaki people during a certain period of time here. So it was the settler people that were using this word. This was not a settler identification word. And yes, families were using it. Sherry's family was using it. And there's another Abenaki person in the chat also saying that they heard that word as well. And I want to thank you both so much for coming to be with us here tonight. I'm hoping people don't hang up immediately, because I have some announcements about some upcoming programs tonight. But first, to thank you both so much. I so appreciate taking this time to hear your stories, to learn more from you. And Bob, we're going to have you back again, probably for a book talk in another couple of months. Thank you so much. It's really important for us also to collect surveys from the audience, because if you like this program and you want us to do more programs, we need that feedback from you to share with our supporters and so forth, so they know how important these programs are. We recorded the program. It will eventually get put on our YouTube channel, and we'll share it out once it comes. Let you all know. We're getting so many thank yous in coming through the chat. Thank you. This was great. Thank you. This was wonderful. Looking forward to hearing more. And for folks in the audience, this isn't the end of Two-Eyed Seeing. There is more. On March 27th, also at 7 p.m., we're going to be talking about Quenatu, the Connecticut River, a sustainer of life in honor of World Water Day. We're going to have a panel of Indigenous citizens and environmental scientists to share their perspectives on living in relationship with the Connecticut watershed. And then on March 25th, if you're a teacher or a homeschooler, the Abenaki Arts and Education Center is having a Water is Life Abenaki teach-in in Virgins. And then on June 17th and 18th, the Abenaki Heritage Weekend in Virgins, Vermont. And that's an intertribal event. So if you want to come and meet people from all different tribes, it's a great place to come and get to know people. I've dropped the survey link down there. If you're interested in making a donation, there's also a donation link that's getting put into the chat box. Those are always appreciated, so we can continue to have events like this. Thank you all so much. In addition to great guest speakers, we appreciate our audience so much, because we wouldn't be able to do this without you. So thank you to all of you. for being here. I don't know if people want to turn on their cameras and wave or say goodnight to everybody or anything like that. If you'd like to do that, you can certainly do that. And I don't know if you can see people or not. I'm going to start unpinning. So let's see, removing spotlight so that way you can all see each other. And Bob and Sherry, do you have any final words for us?
Just, I would like to thank you for putting together this wonderful event and thank my friend Sherry and thank everyone who spent the evening with us.
Yeah, I want to thank the whole audience and say hello to everybody. I know I was doing spot thank yous to different people as I saw friendly faces popping in, but yeah, appreciate everybody coming, and thank you, Bob, and thank you, Vera, and thank you, Francine, and thank you, Eloise, and thank you, Eliza, and all the other people who helped put this together.
Yeah, I should say thank yous too. Also to many of the same people. Eloise is out there and Francine and Elisa, you helped make this happen. Thank you. And also to you, Sherry, because you help us with the Abenaki Arts and Education Center, and we partner with Vermont Abenaki Artist Association. So I hope everyone takes away this idea that working with a lot of people. Hi, Faith. I'm sorry, one of our interns is in the audience too. So thank you to Faith too. And so it's exciting to kind of see those faces out there. Some of your names as we see the registrations come in. We know that we get many people in the audience for all of these programs, and it's great to see those friendships building and growing like Sherry and Bob were talking about. So one final thank you. Thank you all. Great night together. And keep on signing up for our programs. We have a few more coming up before summer, so we hope to see you again. Thank you all. Good night.
Okay, good night.